Round 1. Fight.
What the fuck? Final round. Fight. Fight back, nigga. Fight back, nigga. Fight back.
G'day you game guzzlers. You're about to embark on our flagship series, Creamy Masterstrokes. Make sure to like and subscribe. Now leave me alone.
Enjoy the video and welcome to GamerCream. It's 1995 and I've just spent the whole month saving up some pocket money, and I'm going to reward my month of hard work and play some video games at the arcades because it's 1995. There doesn't seem to be any free cabinets available. I guess I'll just have to wait my turn because it's 1995. Wait, there's someone over there. Maybe I can join him. What is this new game? Tekken? It must be a Spanish game. Hey there, I'm just gonna hop in and play with you. I've saved up at least £2 from all my extra chores. Let me just scurry on in there and play inside this slot.
You lose. Good game, little dude.
Oh, it's a little weird. I didn't even get to play the game. It was way over too quickly. I didn't even learn any moves or anything. Let me get another try.
You lose. Good game.
Okay, what the fuck? I just spent a whole month saving to play video games and this is the shit I get? Do you even have a live mysterious Tekken cabinet, man? I didn't even get the chance to pick my character. I didn't even learn any moves. What the other fuck?
Hey, it's okay, GamerCream. Don't worry, I know you're upset. This is 1995 and we have Tekken at home.
But she was right. We do have Tekken at home because
this is the mid-90s, and growing up, this is all we knew. From NSYNC to Vertical Sync, it all began in the arcades. Arcades are the pre-game lobbies for the games in the 90s. This is where your mum is so fat joke enjoyers that I swear to God if I see you in real life connoisseurs and the no-life video game kids from your streets would match up against each other, and you can know for certain you're the kid who's a champion of your preferred game in your vicinity, or you just could roast someone the best. It was like esports, social media, and teaching school lessons all in one. There were scoreboards that would keep track of time trials, tournaments, and a massive community around the arcade scene. Arcades and amusements, the name had written, had been around since the ancient times, but the idea of a modern arcade and amusements came around in the 1970s with the release of Pong. With the boom of arcades, it brought a huge gush of shit games and great games like Space Invaders, Donkey Kong, Galaga, Pac-Man, and way more that became cultural phenomena. Don't worry, I'm not going to give a whole lot on these games because I think from the title you can guess where I'm going. Shoot to the birth of the 90s, the decade-long feud of the Cold War between two nuclear giants tickling each other, something like that, and the chrysalis phase of a budding new technology called the World Wide Web. Okay, the fucking internet would mean that civilization at this time was relatively in a time of peace and calm. All the time huddled in fear of a potential and eventual nuclear holocaust between two of the largest countries on the earth. Plus, the internet would mean that people were looking to reconnect, and it would bring a new era of connectivity, entertainment, sense of community, and Capri Suns. It was a time of experimentation, failure in the highest highs, true visionaries and controversial pioneers of video games. We had racists showing their visions of what a pure video game would be. We had superpowers fighting against each other in the space of the video games. And we had the first occurrence of violence in the history of the entire world because video games being the obvious portal to all sin in the world, and it's the main reason why the increase in serial murders and school shooting occurrences, not because of religion, sexual preference, ostracization, peer pressure, or growing up poor in a dysfunctional family, or never knowing stability. Who would have known? Thank goodness for cutting-edge conservative nut jobs. Arcades were like the coliseums of ancient Rome, spectators cheering, judges judging, and fighters emoting. There was only one way you could settle whose mum was actually the fattest, and the weapon of choice for those combatants was the fighting game. Fighting games before the 90s were incredibly bare bones. Every fighting game had like no combos, characters had the same move sets as each other, and usually the characters were either complete reskins or just a different colour. And yeah, it put everyone in the same playing field, but where the hell is the fun in that? This all started to change though with Karate Champ in 1984, Karateka in the same year, and the release of the first Street Fighter game in 1987, and left an impermeable mark on virtually all modern fighting games as we know it. Like punching, kicking, blocking, jumping attacks, special moves, animations for all this, and then the feedback on each of the hits was responsive for that time. Most of these are gone and forgotten, but it built the ground for Capcom becoming a huge arcade hit. Society didn't even know it was around the corner in the next 4 years. Zoom ahead to Street Fighter 2, the World Warrior, the quintessential 2D arcade fighting game in the 90s. It is the #1 highest selling arcade fighting game. This is it. The reason we have Evo, the reason why everyone has an unexplained urge to beat the shit out of cars, the reason why so many males became family men, it single-handedly pulled fighting games out of the dirt and cleaned it up and put it on display for everyone to appreciate that it was no longer a caveman game. People were either playing the game or watching the game. It balanced characters, each character has its own movesets, and there were now proper strategies to certain characters. All of the characters had a background now. Okay, I get it. I'll stop talking about Street Fighter 2. Why am I even talking about Street Fighter 2? We're here for Tekken, right? So, to bring this into perspective, Street Fighter 2 had its limitations as a fighting game. It is a 2D fighting game. It is inside of a 2-dimensional space. And what does this mean? This means that even though it is one of the best fighting games to ever be released, there has to be a suspension of disbelief. In real life, if you want to dodge a fireball from a fellow colleague, you can sidestep it to the left, or you can sidestep it to the right. Street Fighter, on the other hand, made Guile look like some sort of Wuxia actor, and you know Guile ain't about to be anything remotely close to anything in that region. None of that Confucianisms.
Flash kick!
This was a problem for most gamers back in the day. Yes, Street Fighter and the fighting games that came out after this, like Mortal Kombat, was amazing, but when will we get something that's a little more closer to our plane of existence? Our realm of dimensions. The race was on. After the release of Street Fighter 2, publishers and producers knew they could not afford to miss out on this. Nearly every single one of them threw their hat in the ring. So many games failed to emulate 3D polygonal graphics. No console or hardware was able to really do it at the time without it being like some sort of stick figure animation with wireframes. It required too much computation and graphical power. Nothing was close. There wasn't even a framework, it wasn't an easy thing to implement, the skills weren't there, and it wasn't exactly being commonly taught at universities or even between companies. 3D animation was also struggling to render this at a reasonable frame rate. The only thing that even came close was VeggieTales. Like, granted, this would have made for a great game and would have solved one of the long lost questions that puzzled millennia: who would win in a one-to-one fight between a tomato and a pickle? But I'm getting off track. In 1993, one company finally did it, and it is the main part of this story. That's right, Virtua Fighter! Oh god, when is he going to get to Tekken? Oh my god, please! I'm getting there. Shut up. Goodness. That's it, I'm leaving! Those bastards at Sega had finally done it. They'd beat everyone to the punch. Sega at AM2, or its full name, Sega Amusement Machine Research and Development Department 2. And damn, here I was thinking they'd created a new time convention like Ante-Meridium 2, The Return of Christ. We all know Sega for that incessant blue-haired spiky mole rat. They were also exceptionally cutting edge. Most of the ambitious games in the 90s were actually created by Sega and their research departments. The legendary Giga Chad, who headed this department and who would become a huge prominent figure in the 90s, was Yu Suzuki. This dude is the godfather of most of the greatest games that ever came out of Sega. His design philosophies and believing that using the latest military technologies to create games that are grounded in realism, and he aimed to show that with his games being immersed in real world elements would help to bring the player in and believe he's a real life Virtua man. Huh? And you can thank him for all the Overwatch VR porn. You're welcome! AM2 just released Virtua Racing in 1992, which was the first good iteration of 3D polygonal graphics for racing games for the Model 1 arcade board system that Sega had spent a number of years researching and creating. Bouncing off of the success from Virtua Racing, Sega wanted to think bigger. They wanted to create a slew of Virtua games: cops, fighters, racing, kids, baggage handlers, war widows. Sega wanted it all, so they split the teams into two departments, AM2 and EM2. I'm gonna make this easier. The Cucks and the Chads. The Cucks would focus on Daytona USA, more racing games, and you guessed it, the Chads worked on Virtua Fighter. The initial idea was to make something that had realistic joint movement, but the Model 1 arcade board just wasn't powerful enough, so they eventually settled on a 2-character fighting game. Virtua Fighter was also being produced and directed by Yu Suzuki. It was composed by Takayuki Nakamura, who made bangers on Michael Jackson's Moonwalker and Streets of Rage, and the lead designer was Seiichi Ishii? Wait. Oh, what was that noise? Never mind. Sega began location demo testing an early prototype version in Japan prior to the game's demonstration at the Amusement Machine Show in August 1993. Each of the testing machines would earn like $600 daily, which is the equivalent of like $1,200 Biden dollars today. It was released in October 1993, garnering critical praise, like 83%, and positive. I don't know what positive meant. Maybe critics back then treated gaming reviews like venereal diseases? I don't know, it was a wild time. Yu Suzuki was on the loose after all. After a year of secrecy, a literal year of development since the start, that's all it took for Sega to completely restructure the gaming landscape. A year is all it took for Yu Suzuki to come into gaming's house and put up his shit-ridden shoes all over the furniture. I could tell you the numbers and be like, yeah, it went on to become Japan's highest grossing arcade game of 1994, and it became the highest grossing arcade game of all time in Japan, and it became the fastest selling arcade game worldwide, American top 5, British top 2, but not only did it basically help to destroy the hegemony of 16-bit games at the time. That's not what the real hitter is. The real hitter is that my boy Shigeru Miyamoto from Nintendo said that it absolutely, totally brain-fucked me big time. Anything I would make after the release of Virtua Fighter would be like me copying Virtua Fighter. I was beating to the punch when it came out. It discouraged me from making games. Not cool. Granted, it didn't take him too fucking long to get over it, and then he made Wave Racer 64, oh my god! But I digress. This game was like the last part of Castlevania Symphony of the Night. There were tidbits and breadcrumbs that Sega might actually create a 3D fighter, and they turned everyone's expectations on their head. Sega came down from the mountain with their 13 commands from the command list, and all of them pointed to 3D. They took all of the publishers under their wing, and nearly every publisher this time thought it possible that they can do 3D. Mario, 3D! System Shock, 3D! Magic Carpet, 3D! Chess, 4D! A lot of games failed during this time to implement 3D, but companies just could not afford to not jump into 3D. The team quickly realised that they had lightning in a bottle and needed to harness it. The team quickly went back to work because Sega was also working on a brand new system, and you better believe that its Superstar Gaming Research Department was going to get its #1 arcade selling hit on that console. See, I'm bringing it all together, from arcades to consoles. I'm semi-coherent. Wait, hold on a minute, what is that on the horizon? Is that a gaming console from a no-name company who makes music players? Who the hell is Ken Kutaragi? I believe in the business, this is called fool's foreshadowing. Since 1992, Sega had been tinkering and designing on a console after the release of the 3D Model 1. The project was headed by Hideki Sato, codenamed the Saturn. Their main aim was to bring Sega's cornucopia of 3D arcade hits into the consumer's home. The Sega Saturn was then released in 1994 to a resounding yatta in Japan, and then a resounding uninspired everywhere else. I'm not going to talk much about the success of the Sega Saturn. To put it simply, it was a successful failure. It did well in Japan, but outside of Japan it didn't do too great. The console was surprise released halfway in 1994. This is like a marketing landmine, because what scornful child-hating parent wants to buy their child a big purchase when it doesn't land on the one day in winter where they can get away with neglecting their child? Sega also tried to change the Gregorian calendar to Saturn Day to match with the release of the Saturn in the US. But Christian values beat Shintoism yet again. I'm gonna make a bold and unafraid claim that's well established, researched and agreed upon. That Virtua Fighter is the game that shifted everything to 3D. It had a profound impact on how we view gaming, yet it's gone now. The reason why this is because its characters are incredibly bland. There's little to no story, and it's hard to associate with the characters because there's no backstory to them. Unless you've been locked into a basement and get immense human connection feelings when strangers tell you their job and their hobbies. It's like a profound meh. The game has always kind of struggled with its identity. I think it's one of the reasons why people like games like Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter. Who do you remember more, Raiden from Mortal Kombat or Lau from Virtua Fighters? Of course it's Lau, because he has a dashing mustache. But we really know it's actually Raiden. Because why? He's a fucking literal thunder god and he protects our realm and we can't even comprehend the power and scale that he resides in. Or would you prefer to just play a Chinese chef? Which other main character do you remember more, Ryu from Street Fighter or Akira Yuki from Virtua Fighters? They both have the same fucking backstory. They practice a martial arts, but why do we remember Ryu? Because he struggles with redemption, turns into a demon, and then he was an orphan that learned from Gouken and Akuma, two polarizing male figures in his life. One of them brought balance and the other one brought chaos. Or would you prefer Akira Yuki, who's also struggled because he doesn't have enough experience? It's like piloting a fucking university student. Give me the demon man! That's why I think that Virtua Fighter has struggled. But this leads me on to the next section. The section you've all been waiting on. What story could we mix with this new breakthrough in 3D hardware? What story could be so fucking acid trip, incoherently blabbingly batshit crazy, with zero restraints, zero concern if you didn't quite catch any of it? A story with angels, demons, crime families, world domination, cyborgs, CRISPR animals, luchadori, immigrant wrestling, doppelgangers, spies, anime robot assassins, and a bear who is taught martial arts, basic Japanese, and sign language.
Good morning.
I told you we would get to it, didn't I tell you? Stop. It can only get so wrecked. So, context and backstory. Do you remember that company that made music players? It turns out they make great fucking consoles that make generations. Yeah, that company led by that new guy, Ken Kutaragi, that everyone didn't think had the chops as a new player in the console market, they fucking destroyed the competition. Their new console, the PlayStation, released also in 1994, can do 3D graphics better than everyone else at the time, and they have the publishers and developers to back them up. Simply put, the console was heaven on earth, and it was an entire arcade cabinet's worth of hardware to play games that you could get in a home in a small, neat grey matte package. And one of those Chad companies that had a large presence in the arcade world and was trying to expand it in the home console market was Namco. Not Namco Bandai as they are today, but Namco. Realising that a long-time competitor had showed that 3D was the way to go, was not going to be the last one out of the barn, Namco had been slowly siphoning off developers from Sega AM2's team to join Namco to help create a new 3D game. Namco had no idea what they wanted to create. They demo tested using texture mapping and animating 3D models, but what could they create with it? They had the momentum, the team, and the drive to create something that could be ahead of the curve, so they could get the upper hand on the longest time competitor. That's when Namco decided to create a little project that stormed the world called Rave Wars! Yeah! Or as you and I would eventually call it,
Tekken.
the mastermind behind this beautiful endeavor would be none other than Sega's lead designer, Seiichi Ishii.
Wait, you look like a snake!
Yes!
What? What the fuck?
He's the guy who worked for Sega and was one of the big minds on Virtua Fighter! After leaving Sega for Namco, Seiichi brought the cutting ideas of what made Virtua Fighter a success to Namco, and that must have been a huge blow for Sega, emotionally and financially. Now, Namco had Sega's creamy sauce right in their hands, dripping between their fingers and maybe some on their back. Oh! Little did they know Namco's new team was now working on what would become the world's longest running fighting game franchise. Their first problem was Sega was now also working on their new flagship game, Virtua Fighter 2, and this means that it was a race to the finish line. Whoever wasn't first to the punch and who didn't bring something new would be the outdated fighter game in the arcades. Granted, at this stage, people didn't even know about Tekken. It was wishful thinking. Virtua Fighter, on the other hand, people knew of it from the first one. It already had a base of customers enthusiasts. But again, like we said, Tekken had something that Sega didn't. They had all the people who knew how to recreate that sauce. So in actual fact, they were both working at the same level when it came to technology. It was the video game equivalent of World War II in Operation Paperclip. Chad American Namco created their own crouch start position a little closer to the Sega in the sprint race by siphoning the Sega Nazis engineers' knowledge of the 3D polygonal graphics and physics. A lot of people don't realise this was one of the critical points. This right here, this point, if Tekken didn't enter in that year, I believe it could have struggled to compete. I think Virtua Fighter would have had a much bigger hold on that market, more resources, and maybe even people would have cemented it as a de facto fighter for that generation. An alternative history where Virtua Fighter becomes the best modern 3D fighters could offer. Scary times. Let me paint this picture. If we started at an equal base in the race, Sega's main focus was again, realism. How can we make this next Virtua Fighter better than Tekken? Sega's main selling points were 1. The move from 30 FPS to 60 FPS, effectively removing the choppy and slower animations and speeding up the game, adding more energy in each fight. Number 2, the bit mapping or texture mapping, which could mean that they could add more detail to the assets like models, background details, and most of all, characters so they don't look like fucking Japanese watermelons. Number 3, improved AI, more stages, more characters, more modes that the player can immerse and challenge themselves with. Sega was aiming to be the premier fighting game. Now let's look at Tekken. Tekken, stop it! No Tekken, that's cheating. Stop right now, stop! Tekken, see me after class. Yes, Tekken had pretty much taken the same idea as above. They knew the pain points in the original Virtua Fighter. Now it was really a race of speed and execution of who could release the first in the coin ops. Tekken begrudgingly decides to say no to the newer Namco 22 arcades because they knew it had to be the first. It remained on the System 11 and it had to sacrifice some graphical power in order to slide in first. A hard decision, but it pays out as it leads to Tekken narrowly beating Virtua Fighter 2 for the first release. Even though they were essentially the same game, this release is critical to both games because whoever wins attracts competitive and casual players, and it establishes a new base of players. A world where Tekken was released after Virtua Fighter would mean it would be labelled as a copy or a clone of VF2, significantly damaging the brand and overall perception as Tekken as a whole. Finally, Japan, September 21st, 1994, Tekken releases and it manages to enjoy 2 whole months of solidifying itself before Virtua Fighter strides in, swinging its huge accolades. I'm sorry guys, I've rouged you. Tekken 1 was not the number 1 hit in the arcades. I'm not gonna say that Tekken was the best arcade fighting game at the time. Like, Virtua Fighter did again become the number 1. This was purely to hopefully inspire everyone, to show the drive, to show the commitment of the Namco team, the problems with challenging something that has an absolute stranglehold on the market. But it is the starting place for Tekken's redemption arc. Tekken did it. It managed to slime its way into 5th place for fighting games in the arcade in Japan and the US, and eventually getting up to 4th place in Japan. I grew up playing both games. Virtua Fighter 2 in the arcades was just better than Tekken 1. The reception of it, the music, the presentation was just better. It was a great time for arcade fighting games as a whole, but both teams didn't rest on their laurels. They quickly got back to the drawing boards as there was an unwieldy beast on the horizon. Yar! It be consoles! Arcade game ports to consoles were so difficult. Arcade boards, funny to imagine, were more powerful than consoles because they were frequently updated and released. It was the best way publishers and manufacturers could get money. Let's look at Street Fighter 2, arguably the most successful fighting game that was released on the arcades. It was a 2D fighter and it was ported to not only one console, but by the time Tekken and Virtua Fighter 2 came out, it had been ported 8 fucking times. To the SNES, the Amiga, Atari ST, Commodore 64, Amstrad CPC, ZX Spectrum, DOSBox, and the CPC changer. This was a 2D fighting game. In reality, it should have been easier to port since it would require less power to render it, but it was not the case. The arcade representation absolutely was not even close on half of these. The first release was the most successful, and it was the SNES. But in order to get it to where it should be, it was slowed down, less animation, compromises at every single turn for the 2D fighter. It was a commercial success, but that was because everybody was thirsty as fuck at the time. Gamers would have easily swallowed a cartridge dunked in horse shit if it had the Street Fighter 2 logo on it. I'm not going to even speak about the rest of this time because I understand those were miles worse on every front. But this was a hurdle that both Sega and Namco had to overcome in order to become the premier console 3D fighter. This next fight was on. It was a tag team fight of the giants. Sony's PlayStation and Namco in one corner and Sega in the Sega Saturn in the other corner. So weird to think that Sega was a console manufacturer and a software publisher at the same time. What did you do, Sega? Namco had some hidden pocket sand to use at its disposal, called PlayStation's 3D capabilities. A couple of months later, the teams presented their projects, and again Tekken was the first of the punch. Jay, bring up the info, because I'm not going to say it. Off release to critical acclaim, Tekken quickly entered in multiple world records for the first PlayStation game to quickly sell over 1 million units, the first game to feature simulated 3D, as well as a record for the entire series as the best selling fighting games series for PlayStation consoles. In Japan, it sold 942,000 units, making it the 4th best home video game of 1995. And Virtua Fighter received 0 world records, but it did end up beating Tekken in ratings, sales, and in just general reception. It was the 3rd best selling home video game of 1995 in Japan, below Dragon Quest VI and Chrono Trigger. Virtua Fighter 2 also became the top selling game worldwide for the Saturn and remains the highest selling Saturn game in Japan with 1.7 million copies sold. It had the best fighting game, best graphics, and most popular game from a lot of the video game magazines at the time. In terms of both, Tekken's port to the PS1 was considered as arcade perfect. It was as close as it could be in terms of accuracy, and they improved it as well by adding unlockable characters and new FMVs, which was also like any other fighting game at the time, and one of the biggest reasons why it also helped to establish dominance. This also had an Achilles heel that people found evident from the release of the second one. Tekken had more replayability, and with the release of FMVs, Tekken also had a unique and wacky story. The control scheme of Tekken was also incredibly innovative and refreshing, because the PlayStation had a very easy control scheme to understand. Each button was assigned to a body part. Square for left punch, triangle for right punch, X was mapped to the left kick, and right kick to the circle button. It also got rid of ring outs and racing car sound effects that plagued Virtua Fighter 2. You can also map the shoulder buttons to control each character's arse cheeks. It was truly revolutionary. Virtua Fighter 2 simplified the button scheme to punch, kick and guard, which meant it had locked itself out of depth. There was going to be a much lower limit of moves available in comparison to Tekken. The Saturn has a much more arcade looking controller. There are 6 buttons on the pad, which means if Virtua Fighter 2 added more functionality, it would feel more closer to an arcade game. Tekken was now literally at Virtua Fighter's heels. It was neck and neck, but it was the next game that would be the defining moment. So at this time, if I had to give a quick comparison of who won on each front, music, Virtua Fighter 2, just easily one of the best video game albums ever. Tekken soundtrack is something from like a cheese dream. The graphics, Virtua Fighter 2. Theme and story, this one's a little bit more harder, but I think Tekken wins this one because there's an overarching story of the birth of the Mishima family, kind of shown through like FMVs. Virtua Fighter story was kind of relegated to being placed inside of the game's manual. Gameplay smoothness, Virtua Fighter 2. Trying to play Tekken 1 was like 2 refrigerators trying to fight. There was no fluid way to mix in moves and that just weren't a set combo. Stages, Virtua Fighter 2. Tekken stages were basically Virtua Fighter 1.5 stages. Overall comparatively, Virtua Fighter 2 wins. Seeing this, the team at Namco fires out Tekken 2 in 1995 in the arcades. Luckily for them, Sega at the time decided to take a step back from the Virtua Fighter mainline series in order to release Fighting Vipers and fighting... You were winning! You were winning! Fighters Mega Mix was like if Smash Bros was originally conceived as a Mugen pack. Imagine a world where you have all Sega's most cherished characters. Then imagine you don't have that, but the 3rd best world instead. Have you ever wanted to play Sonic in a fighting game? Well, fuck you for asking for too much. Here is another character from the Sonic universe, Bean. And while you're at it, here's a car from Daytona, USA. Take it and leave. This game just felt like a Chris Chan fever dream. Let's not talk about it ever again. Same with like, I'm not even going to talk about Fighting Vipers. They did release Virtua Fighter 2.1, but the focus was just not on their flagship fighter. They did release more ports of Virtua Fighter to other consoles, but it was the same game people had been playing for 2 years up to this point. It's a soon-to-be Virtua Fighter feature, some would say. This just wasn't Sega's best time. Tekken 2 Arcade improved on the previous one significantly and added chain throws, back throws, side steps, and attack reversals for some characters. It kept old characters and added 8 new characters with an overall roster of 25 characters. While Sega practiced making crap games while also trying to increase their marketization of the West, Namco was practicing reiterating their main fighting game into a better video game. It also meant that while people were waiting for Sega to release a new Virtua Fighter game, they could play Tekken 2 in the meantime, which meant new people would be introduced to Tekken since it was the best fighting game at that time in the arcades. Namco, you son of a dog, you did it again. From 1995 to 1986, Tekken 2 came and went into arcades and then into consoles, which further solidified it as the premier fighting game. It had a much colder and darker theme and tone than the last, more modes, the characters had more moves, it had a command list. How was it received? Take a look. Let's just take some time out to enjoy how stylistic this game is. This game has one of my favourite aesthetics compared to every other Tekken. It has ominous influences of like Wicked City, 90s optimism, John Woo movies of like Hong Kong cops. It mixes both the gaudy, the reflective, the edgy, the chic in at the same time. It's also felt in the music for each of the characters' stages. Whenever anyone asks me what game best highlights the feeling of the 90s, I point them to Tekken 2 and that intro. In my head, I like to think that every character made money from the first tournament and went on a spending spree. Everyone just looks so extravagant. They even bought more pixels for themselves, it seems to, and even Nina's new candy floss hair. The game exhibits a feeling of it being bigger than itself. The final battle against Kazuya atop his big ass show-off skyscraper in the middle of Tokyo, it reeks of like aristocracy, the colour purple, candelabra and chandeliers, big old red carpets and cravats. Kazuya has let it all get to him. He even gets the first iteration of a Dark Souls boss because you aren't even worthy of him at his worst. Take down his first form in one round and you get pleasured by the devil in the next. Everything in Tekken 2 is just bold. Most of all, the game expanded on the Mishima storyline. Okay, quick sideline, let's talk about how batshit crazy the story is. I'm gonna try my best to speedrun the main story. Tekken 1. Dad loves son. Test son if son is strong enough to run family company. Throw son off mountain. Mountain fall leaves scar, which awakens son's supernatural ability, which makes son turn into the literal devil. Son angry, climb mountain. Dad wants to make his angry devil Japan son more angry. Orders Chinese orphan because Japan son not good enough for family company. Son beats up lots of people in the world in tournaments. And Paul doesn't lose, joins dad's tournament, beats dad with being the literal devil, throws dad off mountain, suck it dad, and then takes over family company. It's a tale as old as time. And Tekken 2 massively expands on what happens when angry devil son is left to be angry and devilish for 2 years. His hatred for his dad allows the devil to absorb him and does bad illegal things like animal testing, extorting and killing people, removing batteries from TV remotes. Truly despicable, and also he becomes corporate. I like to imagine this time he was strolling around the office, literally as the devil, just doing spreadsheets and presentations and just having water cooler talk as the devil. Short version, the PETA activist Jun Kazama wants to arrest Kazuya. Dad comes back into the picture, is really going to give Kazuya the belting of a universe and to take back his family-owned business. Kazuya, in a Hitler-inspired style plot, hosts a tournament so he can bring and get rid of all his enemies in the one place, and to allure Heihachi to join. Thirsty Jun Kazama, eventually realizing that Kazuya is just super hot and he suits that purple drip, puts her animal morality to the side and attempts to fix him. Heihachi just walks right through the tournament, beating everyone, beating his orphaned cuck Chinese replacement Li Chaolan from the first one, who had been like relegated to a secretary for Kazuya. Everyone except Paul. Yeah, that's right, Paul was such a fucking wild card in Tekken. So ultimately, Paul gets his chance to rematch Kazuya from the last game. Paul has been rigorously training up until this point. Who will be the ultimate victor? No man can beat Paul, yet Paul would see defeat before he fights Kazuya. He experiences the painful commute. No, but he literally has to drop out because of a traffic jam, leaving Heihachi to step back in for the final bout between him and his son, Kazuya, to take over the Mishima Zaibatsu. During this time, Jun has been working her pussy magic on Kazuya and caused this conflict between him, the devil, and a better entity inside of him called Angel. This doesn't stop the fight between him and his father, but he ends up losing to him because of this. He actually again regains control of the Mishima Zaibatsu and again throws Kazuya into a fucking volcano, destroying him and the devil gene. And we also learn that Jun gets kind of preggers with Kazuya's child, and then she runs off to collect child benefits. Job complete. Which leads us on to the last game of the PlayStation, the one we will cover quickly. 15 years pass, Heihachi creates a Zaibatsu force, a paramilitary group. I tried to say this like 15 times, I can't say that word, so that's why I'm slowing it down. To protect himself, and dedicates his company to world peace. He then uncovers a temple with Ogre, and he thinks to himself, I want big muscles like Ogre. I'm gonna get that juicy boy. Ogre travels around the world killing all the best martial artists and soon finds Jun Kazama and her son, Jin Kazama. Jun tells him to seek out Heihachi. If something mysteriously goes wrong, something goes wrong, Jun dies, and after Jin tries to 1v1 him. He nearly dies, goes through the same thing as Kazuya, and he does a deal with the devil and it becomes part of his left arm. Jin finds Heihachi and then he goes to school because at this time he was barely speaking any language, like a caveman child. Heihachi, in Mishima style, creates another tournament to hopefully use Jin and his friends as bait to get Ogre. So the short version of this, Paul wins again. Fucking Paul, man, he beats everyone, he destroys Ogre, he takes the babes, the prizes, and fucks the fuck out of the tournament. Just, job done. But in true Paul style, he doesn't realise that Ogre absorbing Heihachi's essence has turned him into true Ogre, and he's not dead. So Paul leaves, looks at his PayPal account, and realises he gets no money.
I'm gonna kill myself!
So Paul gets nothing, and the tournament organisers scramble to find someone, and they end up picking Jin Kazama to fight True Ogre. The final fight ensues, Jin wins and avenges his mother, and after being crowned victorious, Heihachi pops down with a couple of his goons and tries to kill his own grandson because he wants all that juicy Ogre juice to himself. Jin gets popped in the head, becomes the devil, smashes Heihachi against the wall, and just rides out of there. Bonkers, right? Okay, so hold on your hats, it gets even more bonkers per iteration after this. Like another Biocore, resurrecting a Kazuya, finding out Kazuya's mum's Kazumi, Granddaddy Jinpachi's coup, and being in prison under the temple, Jin taking a sabbatical to Australia and becoming un-Mishima, Jin becoming the head of the Zaibatsu, becoming independent and declaring all-out war against all of the nations in the world, more illegitimate Mishima sons, ancient demons, anime robot girls, sentient bears, black ninjas, additions of Street Fighter characters becoming canon, Ada Williams becoming head of the Zaibatsu, the Death of Wang, Crimson Guy, Italian Pop Assassins, orbital lasers, the actual reason why Heihachi throws Kazuya off the mountain, the reason why he has the devil gene, and of course one of the saddest parts in gaming history, the culmination of 20 years of gaming, the actuality of Heihachi Mishima being no longer in the game by the hands of his rage-induced son, Devil Kazuya. Or so it is for the time. Maybe it'll stay like this, but time will tell, but Tekken has only taken bold moves, and I hope that this one will stay. Tekken has never really remained completely hinged or unhinged. It's always been the edge case and it's always pushed its story to be grounded in realistic human emotions, like the cost of revenge, ambition and continuing a family legacy. But it's also coated in like completely unrealistic, comical and the daft, because it's, at the end of the day, There's no interesting way. Conceptually, the characters in fighting games can have day-to-day jobs and just keep coming back to every game and meet up in a tournament, except from some sort of weird Machiavellian overarching plot involving unearthing demons and Paul. There are more stories in between this happening, like Paul's arc for glory, his struggle of destitution and his understanding of the simpler ways of life. The rivalry between the idea of Armor King and carrying on a mantle and a legacy. The Jin, Pachi and Wang story of trying to understand an ever-changing world and staying still and growing older inside of it. And what would happen if a piece of wood took over the Zaibatsu? I wanted to focus purely on the Mishima storyline because I'd be gushing over the story and the alternative outcomes for these. Tekken's story, I feel, has been one of the best and refreshing stories in gaming. This is the main reason why I think Virtua Fighter could never compare to something like Tekken. The characters in the story is too much like everything else. It's too grounded in reality, which doesn't make it feel like a game. It's too much like the martial arts movies and the literature before it. The later iterations became more interesting, but by that time, Tekken had already sunk its fangs in. Find me a book or a movie that's even remotely close to Tekken's story. Sega releases Virtua Fighter 3 into critical acclaim again. Everyone loved it. By everyone, I meant Japan, and a couple of people not from Japan. Alas, this is where the cracks in Virtua Fighter really started to show. It had critics bringing to light that it hadn't actually changed much from Virtua Fighter 2. It was universally felt like it was just some sort of Virtua Fighter 2.2 with fancy new graphics and some plot. Okay, sales time, woo, woo! Virtua Fighter, Japan goes up, rest of world goes down. Tekken, Japan goes, rest of the world, yes, yes, yes! Virtua Fighter could enjoy a nice short Pyrrhic victory of being the best in Japan because Namco decides to release something felt for generations. A game so resolute and grabs every fighting game by its balls. A game so magnetic when you saw it in the arcades, you shuffle to find money in your pockets and go play it. And where Tekken really goes worldwide. They released Tekken 3. Between the 1997 arcade releases and the 1998 PlayStation releases, we were also blessed with flip phones and a Philly-busting president and way too many white girls on TV, which was largely precipitated by the condiment woman. But it also blessed us and humanity with the best fighting game, but something was off with this one. It was a little different. If you've ever played Tekken 2 and Tekken 3, there's something about both of them. There's a huge shift in tone, gameplay, and not to mention the roster. Tekken had been steadily improving, focusing on its mainline games and expanding its roster in each game, trying new characters and dropping those who didn't work. Only 6 of the Tekken 2 roster had been carried into the huge 21 character roster for Tekken 3, trying new gameplay features like reversals for everyone, quicker recovery and the new juggling mechanics for combos. We also see that it's now been ported to the newer arcade hardware from the System 11 to the System 12, which means it's smoother gameplay and there was a budget to make all the animations created with motion capture, which only benefits into making the fights more intense and fluid. But all these improvements aside, there was also large rumblings inside of Namco at this time. The main director of both the first 2 games, Seiichi Ishii, had dropped out before the third Tekken was released. The rumour was that there was a little bit of the conflicting views between Katsuhiro Harada, who was a co-director, and Seiichi Ishii. Harada in one of his quotes claims that
Seiichi Ishii did not believe the third one was going to be a success and did not believe in the vision.
And likewise, Seiichi Ishii in a more polite way mentions that he just wants to step down because he feels like giving Harada and the other directors the leadership would just be the better idea because he understood where the concept of Tekken was wanting to go. But also there are just way more juicy antagonizing quotes between the both of them up until this point, but I will leave it at that. And if you're a scandalmonger, just look it up. Believe it or not, for better or for worse, it was the best decision. Yes, there was something lost in that decision. We lost the gothic, gaudy, dark brooding, dripping in its own edge Tekken, but Harada and the team tried to break away from that, to get away from something that didn't take itself serious, And this is really where Tekken became really experimental, and it took a lot of big jumps, technically, graphically, and in terms of its story. Harada and the team's aim was to make Tekken fun again, to make Tekken into a video game. I like to think Tekken 1 and 2 were just like early access concept demos before the actual game of Tekken 3. I love all the Tekkens before this, but it's incredibly hard to express the jump that Tekken 3 actually did for the series. It dropped the idea of sub-bosses from the second Tekken, it added a slew of new modes like time trials, team battle modes, survival mode, Tekken Force, which was like making a Streets of Rage game, but the Tekken characters, and you guessed it, volleyballs. And we experienced a new storyline about Jin Kazama that helps to expand the Mishima family story into a new generation, into the 2000s. And more importantly, this moment right here, this is where the fighting game run overtakes the master. Tekken's sales, including arcade releases, had reached a height never seen before, and it also reached so many homes, so many newcomers had picked up to just give the series a try. It had rave reviews from every reviewer, and it's still remembered to this day in the same conversation as the other big games like Street Fighter 2, Mortal Kombat, and Star Wars Masters of Terrace. Tekken 3 had sold up to 7 to about 8.3 million copies. An astronomical amount for any game or any console, and it deserves the place as the 5th best selling PlayStation 1 game. From this point, there was no going back. Tekken had hit its stride. Cut to now times, Tekken is nearly on to its 8th iteration. The madman Harada is now front and centre as the face of Tekken. He's experienced it through its highs and its lows, and it's now part of gaming history no matter what happens, and that is part of because of Namco's ambition to create a 3D game at a time where there was no frameworks, no easy way to even find the right people. Seiichi Ishii and his team of merry men from Sega and their jump to Namco, and of course who we remember now as the madman of Tekken, Harada, who has suffered the successes and experienced the troubles of Tekken up until now. Tekken has shifted hands multiple times, but I feel like through all of those hands it's passed through, each person has just kind of left their mark, and that's the Tekken that we have today. If we could take one thing from this, it's never to underestimate the cunningness of an underdog, and to see that even in unsurmountable odds there's always a chance to overtake, always a chance to steal the belt from the champ, but now it's up to Tekken to defend that belt. I'm excited to see if there's a new runt that enters the ring to grab the belt from Tekken, but we'll just wait and see. Tekken feels like it was never expected to be remembered, and it never took itself completely serious, and it always understood its main purpose as a video game, to bring people together and to settle whose mum was the fattest. And it's your mum! Another segue into the creamy rating, the Tekken series, and more importantly Tekken 3 rates as a nectar of the creamy realms, handed down by the creamy ancients of fate, chosen and appointed by the creamy gods. We will never experience a cream this divine or succulent or even scribbled into the annals of the cream halls ever again. 9 tubs of bean flavoured ice cream out of 2 scoops of paracetamol ice cream. Only play this if you're wanting a non-compromising onset of diabetes. Again, thanks everyone for listening to my rambles. Let me know what your thoughts are on Tekken and Virtua Fighter, and what your favourite memories are, and I would appreciate any comments or likes on this. And until next time, this has been GamerCream, and stay creamy, boys and girls.